Let's anyway get started. So today's session is going to be extremely interesting, and I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you, Aditi, for joining us. I'm going to introduce her in a minute. But before that, I just want to, let everyone know that this session is completely focused on how you could kind of drive your whole career towards a consulting kind of an option. What we've realized, and I've been in this industry for over more than 15 years now, and consulting is one of the topmost career choices for most people who look at doing an MBA. And who other than someone who got into INSEAD and now work for McKinsey can be one of my best guests for this particular session. So let me get started for all of you. So there are people who are in this journey right now, writing their essays, applying to the schools. There are some people who are working on their GMAT right now. I'm going to be talking from their perspective. I'm going to be focusing on what goes in their head, because since I've been part of so many journeys now, I know what are the kind of what is the kind of feeling they go through when they are in this whole process, right? So with that, let me get started. Thank you all for joining me. Let me give you a little background about myself. I'm Shrikala. I'm one of the co-founders of Crackverbal. I've been in this industry for over more than a decade now, I think 15 years now. I work with thousands of students across the globe, applying to top schools. What I have also been, so in my previous life that I would kind of talk about, I work for HP. I work for a startup. And then, I got into entrepreneurship sometime into 2011, right? So that's been my journey. In this journey, I've also mentored thousands of students, plus I've also been part of the Entrepreneur Network. We've also been part of the Stanford Seed Program. Crackable has been part of the Stanford Seed Program, where we had access to not only Stanford alums, but also great professors at Stanford who guided us in terms of how we could plan our business model. Plus, I'm also part of the Cherry Blair Foundation, where I mentor women entrepreneurs across the globe, and again, who are looking at starting up or are in the initial phase of starting up. So that's a little bit about me. Okay, let me just introduce the guest of today. So, hi, Aditi. Maybe you could just introduce yourself. I would like you to go about that.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, ma'am, and thank you for having me. So hi everyone, my name's Aditi. I graduated as a metallurgical engineer from NIT Raipur in 2018. After that, I went to work for Tata Steel, which I did for about 5 years. I did operations, and then I was doing business transformations for a bit for them. But yeah, the natural step for me after that was to do an MBA, and that's when, I went into this total chaos mode where I applied at a lot of schools, shortlisting where to go, where to apply, the best people to partner with that could help me get there. But more about that in a bit. But so I was lucky enough to get into INSEAD. Went there, had a great year, fantastic year. I actually joined in the July batch. But yeah, so I graduated like a couple of months ago, actually. But again, consulting is like a Kool-Aid, I think, that people also, there's a consulting Kool-Aid that definitely does exist in these schools. And so for me to get into McKinsey was like, again, a lot of work for sure, but it was also a lot of luck and I think good wishes. And so I'm here right now based out of Dubai, working on just getting oriented, getting used to the program, that kind of stuff right now. But I have a project coming up. So yeah, that's a very like brief professional background of myself.
Thank you so much, Aditi. And I'm going to deep dive into each of these aspects as we go ahead as part of this session too. So before I get started, I just wanted to kind of get an understanding from all the participants here. What stage are you in terms of your preparation, in terms of applying this year? If you're at the GMAT stage, write GMAT. If you're at the application stage, write application. I just want to make sure that we steer our conversation towards the people that we are addressing here. And so, yeah, application, okay. Shantanu is in the application stage. Okay, great. Others, GMAT, okay. Kritika is at the GMAT stage, great. Others, okay, application stage. Watson is at GMAT stage. Okay. Sahil is in the application stage. Okay, application, GMAT. Okay, great. Thank you so much, guys. Keep putting in. That gives me a very good idea. So, all right. So let me get started with the biggest challenge that most people face when they are actually starting this whole journey, right? What I realized is one thing that people, when they are planning their GMAT, this is something that they completely miss out on in terms of why are they really applying, why are they actually putting in so much effort on the GMAT? In most cases, like yours, also, you had a cushy job, nice work, Tata Steel, doing your bit, doing excellent in your career also. Why did you want to shake up everything and actually pursue an MBA? What was that need, and what was that whole thought process that you felt that, okay, I need to invest that 1 year into something that can actually reset things that I really want to do, or at least explore new avenues? So tell me a little bit about why finding your YMBA. How did you do that?
It's so interesting that you asked me that because it didn't really start after I started working. For me, an MBA was something I wanted to do, I think, when I was in 12th grade. I had already made up my mind that I was very honest with myself. I have a very limited skill set. I was not going to be like, a researcher or a scientist or a doctor or, the typical things that people aspire to be when they're younger. And I was like, what is my skill set? I enjoy working with people. I enjoy chatting with people. So I'm going to find a job that's going to help me, basically use my skills and do well for myself. And that's why I decided, okay, let's do an MBA. It, in fact, guided a lot of my choices in life also. I think going into metallurgy was also not something that was very common, especially as a girl. And, there were not that many prospects that I knew of as an 18-year-old. But what I told myself is eventually I'll do an MBA and then I'll kind of hit a reset button. By the way, I had no like knowledge or I had not researched anything. This was just something an 18-year-old has told herself and decide this was the basis on which I picked my degree for engineering. So that was really funny. But eventually the plan was also to join a company. I mean, obviously Tata Steel is a great company to work with. But the plan was to do that for a year, maybe two, and then leave. Because again, in my limited understanding, there's a minimum 2 year work requirement. So I would hit that number and I would exit typically. But somehow when I joined the company, I realized that there's a whole world that I didn't know about. And so I stuck on for longer. And, I decided to learn a lot of things. I think it's also given me so much of an opportunity to be at Tata Steel to really see a different life than I would have normally. And so it was interesting. I stayed and I was like, okay, next year I'll go do my MBA. Next year I'll write my GMAT. So for me, it was also pushing my GMAT a lot. I ended up writing it for the first time as per the plan at my 2 year mark, but I did it for the Tata Administrative Services program instead of doing it for the GMAT. Ended up getting a decent score, did not make it through task that year. So I was like, okay, let's stay. And then, the year after that, I got promoted, another reason to stay. So I kept pushing myself. But finally, when I did start getting more complacent, I started seeing that I was probably giving more than I was learning. And for me, that has always been an equation that's very important, is that I always learn a lot and I make sure that I give as much as I'm learning. And whenever that power dynamic shifts, where I'm feeling like I'm just doing a lot of work without really learning a lot of new things, then maybe it's time to change. And so that was kind of a point that I hit at the 5 year mark. But what was interesting about it, in it's also a lot to do with the why part of it, right? Like for me, I really did want to go outside. I wanted to get a more global education. I wanted to understand how businesses really work, especially given that the world's getting smaller. Um, so I knew I wanted to do like an international MBA, but what eventually ended up happening was that I got into ISB because that was the only school I applied for that year. And I was like, okay, I got into ISB, but this was not really the plan. What do I do now? So, it was a lot of back and forth with my family, with my friends, just a lot of chatting, a lot of honest reflection. And then I deferred my ISB, entrance by a year. And that year was when I started studying. That year was like, okay, now this is the last chance. If I don't study now, I'm going to go to ISB, and it's a great school, not to take anything away from that, but it just didn't align with my goals. So then I spent that year, and that year I was like, I'll do anything to kind of like, broaden my horizon a little bit. So it was the same year I studied for my GMAT, I gave TAS, and luckily, I don't know, it was a lot of good fortune, I think, on my part. But I did end up clearing both TAS as well as, a couple of B schools. Um, and that's when the YMBA part really kicked back in and helped me focus on the fact that a degree, especially from like a really reputed school, would go a long way in the career that I thought for myself. And in that sense, that's honestly why I ended up here. So I don't have some profound answer to like why MBA. It was seriously just an honest sense check of what my skill set is. It was a very limited skill set, but I thought that I was I was happier being a jack of all trades. That's what I'll say.
Interesting. So you mentioned that, there is one level of research that you did when you actually went through understanding why you want to make this investment in yourself, right? What was that process? Was it more specifically towards, maybe reaching out to peers or reaching out to just family, friends? What was that in-depth approach that you took when you're looking at planning, okay, this is something that I really want to do?
For the schools, you mean, or for the MBA itself?
For the MBA itself.
For the MBA, honestly, I did not at all vet or verify. This is just something I told myself. And it's one of those, like self-fulfilling prophecies that I created for myself, where I was like, okay, I want to do an MBA. I never even considered that not doing it might be a good idea. There was a bit of hesitation, I think, when I had the option of TAS, because it was giving me the same opportunities to diversify and, like broaden my horizon, like I said before. But it was just, I think for me, an MBA was also a lot about being around people that inspire me. And this year has really been a testament to that, right? Like the reason we try to go to good schools or to get into good, companies or whatever the definition of good is, I don't think has a lot to do with the societal value. For me, it was a lot about having people around me who have who are ambitious, who aspire to really change the world. And I think being in that company is really exciting for me because that
Mhm.
motivates me to do better. And so that
Mhm.
was the only thing I had, but I don't think I ever considered not doing an MBA really.
Right, right. So I think fair enough. And I remember speaking to, one of the aspirants that I'm working with, and I think he's also there in this session. He said, I want to be the dumbest in the class, right? And that really stuck with me. And I think that's a very good reason of why, you would really want to kind of look at an MBA as an option for yourself, right? All right. So let me get to the next point, which is more around selecting these schools, right? There is still a very finite list of schools that people have. If you're looking at Europe, there's set of fine arts schools that you want to apply to. Singapore, there's again a set of fine arts schools. US, okay, the number might be longer or the list might be longer, but still, if you are really looking at getting into the top ones, when you're looking at ranking and stuff like that, there is still a finite list that you look at. Um, I remember talking to you, this was sometime in 2022, same time, September, where we got into a call and we were evaluating, how you would want to plan this entire journey, right? In terms of picking schools of your choice, what was your approach? Did you go with some list that you had already created? What were the pros and cons that you really weighed around when you actually picked the schools you wanted to apply to?
I think when I approached the process, I had a lot of web research. And so it was literally like, a top 15 or 20 list that you would get on any website, right? And for whatever reason, I was like, okay, this is the top schools to go to. But in hindsight, that was like a very naive approach. And I do urge everyone to prepare better than I did because I had then a very crunched period to actually think about what are the schools that I do want to apply to. Um, Especially when I started my application process, right? Like all this is pre even giving my GMAT. I was like, we should go to the best schools. And that's the only rationale behind it. But I think the process of speaking with you as well as like, a lot of colleagues at Crack Verbal, as well as people who have been in those shoes, like peers, alums, from your own personal networks, right? For me, I had a lot of people from my college, from work, who had gone on to do their MBAs. And the more I spoke with them, the more I realized that your B school selection is a means to an end. Like an MBA is essentially a tool that helps you get somewhere. And I think that's a perspective that a lot of people sometimes overlook because they're like, oh, we want to go to the number one school, whatever that may be in whatever region. But the why you want to go to that school is not that clear, right? So for me, when I actually had to start shortlisting and realized that I couldn't really apply to 20, 50 schools or whatever, it became a lot about the location for me. Where do I see myself living in the longer term? So the thing with B schools is, especially if you go to the US, your geography is very limited to the US to a certain extent in terms of where you can work. I mean, the odds of you going to a USB school and working in the US is higher. So if that's a life you see for yourself, then like, sure. Europe, I think, is more central, but again, limited geography of Europe, Middle East, perhaps. So going from, if you go to an EUB school and then you want to shift to North America, that's harder to do. And these were considerations that I started factoring in. For me at this time also there was a lot of personal, I think, factors that I started weighing in about how far I want to be from family. My family is very spread across right now. So even going back home is like, a struggle, even when we were in Jamshedpur and Orissa and Hyderabad, wherever. So for me, especially post-COVID, having stayed alone for 5 years, these things started becoming more important. So I started factoring that, and I really didn't want to be in a place that was going to be a 15-hour flight away from home. Um, so those were things I was thinking about. There were other personal factors. For example, my partner at the time was also applying. So we wanted to also look at places where both of us could potentially go to and, like see ourselves living in the longer run. There were a lot of things, I think, but eventually it came down to the more emotional factors. I did apply to a couple of US schools, but those were also like those were the kind of schools where if I got in, I would definitely go just because of the alums that I'd spoken to over there or the people that I knew from work who had gone there because this was a community that I understood and vibed with, if I may say so almost, right? But yeah, so for me, it was literally just that about the prospects of working. I was very excited about working in the Middle East. I have had a little bit of experience being in the region. My parents were here for a bit. So this was like a perfect sweet spot for me in terms of having that quality of life that I wanted, as well as being close enough to home. And the best place to get me here was perhaps an EU school or INSEAD at that point. So I basically chose INSEAD for that reason.
Makes sense, makes sense. And I think I remember this, and this is happening to me right now. So one of the candidates I'm working with has an Excel sheet, which also has time to reach home, right? So he has all the flights from all these places and how much time it is going to take to reach Mumbai, right? So that is also one consideration that people have when they are looking at
Very
applying.
important one, actually. I mean, you think about it, and when you're thinking about it flippantly, you can say that, okay, fine, it's like, it's a 10-hour flight. What's the big deal about it? But the 10-hour flight comes with the price tag, which means when you're thinking about it in your first year of work, when you're homesick, whatever, the odds of you actually going through the booking of that ticket, taking a long enough break, because if you're putting so much time, you want to take like, a week, two off maybe. Would you have that capacity? I think these are nuances that become very real when you're actually living this life. For me right now in Dubai, I can go to India over a weekend, right? I can choose to do that and it won't be too much of an investment of time or money or energy. But I think it's super important to factor that in.
Right, right. Awesome. Next, I want to talk to you about planning your entire application journey, right? I see different approaches to how when we are working with people, I see people, there's some who are extremely serious about this whole thing. There are some who struggle that, work is also there because they are also working. They also have to be rock stars at work. Plus, they also have to think and they have to write their essays. Plus, at the same time, there's also this time and deadline pressure that, oh, there's a deadline that they have to meet and they might miss the bus if they don't do this. Tell me a little bit about how you planned this entire journey, because like I said, I remember you started August 2022, September 2022 is when you started this whole process of thinking through applying the whole process. What did you think was when before you got started to when you actually got into the whole process? What was it different for you? How introspective was it for you? How did you kind of manage work with writing your essays and even research for that matter? Because this also involves you talking to people and alums and doing your research about the schools you want to apply. How did you go about that process? And your tips, especially for people, all those who are applying, all these people who are attending today are in this stage. So they want to know, tips from someone who's got into a school of your choice. What are your tips and what are your thoughts on what they should do and should not do also in this whole process?
Far be it from me to tell anyone what they should do. But you're very right. I actually gave my GMAT in September, with the intention that if I get a decent score, I'll apply for round one. That was the plan. But like you said, I missed almost every deadline. I had one school left, which I applied to, and I was under the impression that, you know, so diction and writing has not been that much of an issue for me in life. And so I went in with this almost overconfidence, if I may say so, that the first draft that I write will be perfect. And so I wrote my first draft and I read it through. I did like, the typical, oh, I've written it once, I looked at it tomorrow, edited a few bits, but nothing major. And I submitted it and I got my rejection. And that was the first rejection that I got from this whole process. So I was very taken aback. And then this was, I think, end of September. So I had to sit down and take stock of what was going on. And I think with the application process, right, what tends to happen is we don't give ourselves enough time to reflect. I think very often it's at the application point when you wish your life had been cooler, if that makes sense, which is, it's unrealistic to think that, right? But I also think that there are so many things we do in each of our works and lives that has a paradigm of the wow factor that you're looking for. And it's just about sitting down and taking the time to reflect, finesse, work over each bit. What's a better way to say this? And I think those are the nuances that one should really take the time for, especially for everyone that's applying now. I I urge you to be honest with yourself. Say that, okay, these are the 10 things that I've done in life. I don't know if it's wow or not, but these are the 10 things. These are the 10 things I want to say. And then over the next month, 2 months, work on refining that and really using that as your platform to get you to that delta that you need, right? To get into that school. I don't think manufacturing stories or any of these things really helps, because then you're underconfident when you walk into the interview room, right? Because then you're like, oh, what did I say? How do these things add up? Which is honestly more work than it's worth. B, if it's an honest story or it's something that you're inspired by, then you can speak about it with that much passion. You can put into words the amount of energy or the excitement that it is channeled for you. And those are, I think, things that do take time. I I I was also working while I was doing my applications. Um I went on a family holiday actually. I remember we had gone to Kashmir and I was sitting in the back of the car and writing my essay while there was this beautiful scenery around me, because I knew that this was my shot. Like this was the shot I was shooting basically, right? So yes, it can be a lot of work. It can be a little longer hours than you would hope. But I think it's what you were saying. It's here when your YMBA thing kicks in. So if your reason is strong enough, then it's long hours, but it doesn't feel like that much because you're working towards a goal, and it's not like arbitrary work that you're doing. So that is number one. Number two is number two. I've already said. I think just like be honest with yourself, write your stories down, whatever. Number three is be willing to accept help and feedback. I think with a lot of us, and this was true for me and a lot of people I knew, is when we receive feedback on our essays, we almost take it personally. And there's a tendency to become defensive about someone saying, oh, but this is not the story you should go with. And I think that amount of agility is very important, especially during the process, to be open to feedback, listen to how your story is being perceived by other people. So a trick that I have for this is, imagine you're saying the story to your grandparents who have little to no context of what you've done at work, is the context. So if you can explain to them through your essay, then you've done a sufficient amount of job, like on your applications or on your essays, I would say. But
Right.
yeah, I think top of head, these are the few things.
Perfect, perfect. And I think it's a very valid point, because what also happens is, in most of the roles that people play, in whatever you do, you're not used to writing as much, right? Your work does not involve writing. So I always feel that this MBA application process itself is getting out of your comfort zone, kind of a thing for most people. I would say 99% of the people, 1% of the people might be maybe still they are good at writing, but this is still a process of getting out of their comfort zone, which also me. And the second thing is, we as Indians are not very good at talking great things about ourselves, right? We have never
Mm.
said great things about ourselves, and that is also one level of discomfort that people come with, which is, how can I mean, doesn't it sound boastful? This is what I get, it sounds very
I've had
boastful.
so much of that. I've had so much of that because you're also almost brought up in a culture where talking about oneself is arrogance. And I will say, though, there is a very fine line between upselling yourself and being arrogant about it. And I think that is the line one needs to tread when going through life, not just applications, but even through life, right? Like if it's a business meeting and you'll be in a business context at some point, either pre or post your applications, it's not about saying I'm the only one that can do this job or I'm the only one that deserves this seat. But it's about saying I also deserve a seat. And that's, I think, a difference of perspective, which I personally struggled with so much because steel is a very non-glamorous industry. So when I was coming in, I honestly didn't think I had anything to show for my application. But it's when you tell your stories to people and they give you a feedback of, what they've heard, that you begin to see value. I think,
That's so true.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely true. All right. So, okay, let me get to the next point on your entire INSEAD experience, right? And I think this is something that everybody wants to also listen to. Uh, Again, a lot of people, when they actually join a B school, they start with a lot of self-doubt. I know they are ecstatic about getting into a top B school, and okay, they're going to meet really smart people. But then there's always this thing that, will I be able to survive? Will I be able to kind of do what I really want to do, right? So, tell me more about your own thought process when you joined. That is number one. And tell us a little bit about your INSEAD experience also. What is it about that school that really excited you? What was it about the classmates? What do you go through in a B school like INSEAD?
For sure. Let me take the first part first, right? Because I think very interesting. I think everyone walks in with an imposter syndrome into a business school, no matter what they've done, right? I had friends who were entrepreneurs at 27. They had existing businesses that were doing great, that had received funding, and they were underconfident about, their place at the school. So first, everybody faces this. Second is an anecdote, actually. It was on our first day. It was the orientation. We had a guest speaker, and she came in and she said, one of you has been picked by mistake, and everybody else is fine. And there was pin drop silence, if I may say so, for 2 minutes. And she said, in that 2 minutes, everyone thought that the mistake was them. And so don't stress about it. It happens to everyone. It happened to them when they had joined in the 90s. Um, it was something that stuck with me, right? In the sense that I think it takes time for us to really value the work we've done and get your first day at B school. You're still settling into the fact that this was a dream, you've achieved it. Now what, right? And I think it's the now what that really makes people nervous about how they're going to go forward. So it's completely okay to feel like an imposter, but trust me, that's not the case. If you've gotten into the school, whichever school it might be, it's meritorious, right? The process is meritorious. And so you are definitely the best candidate for the seat that you're sitting on. Number two, about my NCR experience. Oh, I can speak for hours about this. I will try not to. I know I get lengthy with my answers. But for me, I think this year, the last year at INSEAD, has been a lot of revelations, I think, with myself, um, in ways that I did not imagine, right? I mean, I think I was lucky enough to have had a lot of exposure internationally, even when I was younger. Um, Thank you, Akhilesh. Sorry, it just pops up and it's distracting. No, but um, the revelations that I had, right? I think for me, number one, being around so many people, like I was saying earlier, who've been so successful in different strides of life is extremely interesting. Second, at INSEAD, the average age is also higher. So I think the average age was around 29. And I had gone in when I was 27. So that was another factor that, where I was thinking about, oh, do I deserve to be here? Everyone's worked for so long, they've done so much. But it's it's a school that really thrives on diversity, right? And I know a lot of schools preach this. I cannot speak for what the culture is like at those schools, but from what I've heard from my friends and colleagues, a lot of schools do, even though they're international, so to speak, do have a majority from a particular region, right? And so there is an influence of that culture. At INSEAD, that really, truly was not the case. I think we had more than 100 nationalities, and in a classroom of 70 people, you wouldn't have more than 3 or 4 or 5 people from any particular country. And those countries would also be like the larger like populous countries, perhaps. Um, but the thing about that and why diversity for me was such a big takeaway from my year at INSEAD is that there are so many different perspectives to the same thing, right? Like a simple thing like eating dinner. Now, dinner is at different times. It's at different comfort zones for different, depending on which part of the world you're in. The amount of food you eat, the way you eat, who you eat with, the times you eat, how you order, who orders, who pays. These are the smallest nuances, and it's like it's such a trivial example, but even something as a dinner would show you how people from different cultures can still sit at the same table, especially given everything that's happening in the world now. I think being able to look past borders and flags was just, for me, it was just very inspiring. And I think that's something that I've carried forward since. I think before INSEAD, no matter what, I would always think about it as an us versus them almost situation. I hope I was not ever like, discriminatory in any way, but it was always us versus them, right? Like there was a collective and there was an externality, so to speak. Um, but I think going to INSEAD for me definitely has changed that. Some of my closest friends are now spread across the world. Those are the cons, by the way, of going to a school that is so diverse, is that you make great bonds and then people go off to different parts of the world. So not everything rosy in that sense. Um, but it's amazing. The amount of culture that you're exposed to, the amount of knowledge you're exposed to sitting in the classroom. You can debate the same topic from 50 different perspectives, literally. And the school gives you space to do that. So it's not that, conversations are shut off or there are conversations you avoid. Given, again, everything that was happening over the last year is still happening, there are conversations, there are dialogues that people have about it. And again, it doesn't help you decide right or wrong, but it does give you a perspective into people's lives, right? So for me, that was number one. Number two, I think, is that the school also kind of inspires you to do good. I mean, a lot of schools talk about like, hope you become the best people, become the best leaders, whatever. INSEAD's caption was being a force for good. And believe me or not, every person there really did think that they were capable of changing the world in their own stride. And there's a different, it really empowers you when people around you are so convinced that they're going to
Right.
do good, that they're going to change the world. It makes you almost want to be good enough to do that and upskill yourself as required. Three, I think, was the amount of travel. I think I've traveled a lot. A lot of people that go to INSEAD go to the school because it's a great opportunity to travel. But you don't travel in a touristy way. It's so, for example, I was in Vienna over the summer, and a friend of mine was kind enough to host us, and we got to see Vienna from her light. Like, we went grocery shopping, we cooked dinner together, we ate breakfast that we put together in what, her family situation was. And I think these are the things that give you insights into different people, their families, their truths almost, right? Um, which for me again was something that I don't think I would have gotten if I hadn't gone to NCR. So yeah, top three things I think are these.
Right. So INSEAD is big in consulting, right? And that is one thing that anyone who was looking at getting into a consulting career always looks like. What is it that they focus on to bring in that drive towards consulting for the people who are looking at consulting as an option? I know that there are a lot of people in NCED who also come from McKinsey or was sponsored from McKinsey also. So how does this whole thing work, and how do you pick your focus on consulting while you are at NCED?
No, that's a great question, actually. I think INSEAD also does have not just McKinsey, but like almost every big consulting firm or any consulting firm for that matter does have representation in the student population in some way. Um, and I think that's actually a great experience to kind of figure out what is the firm you want to go to, right? At the end of if you want to do consulting. So let's actually narrow it down, right? There's two parts. Believe me, there are non-consulting jobs that exist that you can get into. Great jobs, by the way. Fantastic opportunities that one can pursue. But you're right, there is a larger traction for consulting. I think a lot of this is driven because of the financial tag that it carries, but even otherwise it's sold as a great job. You get to travel, you get to meet new people, work on different industries. So for someone like me who only had experience in one sector, and I really wanted to diversify and understand the things that I don't know also. Like, there were so many things that I just don't know. Am I into marketing? I don't know. So for me to decide these things straight off the bat after an MBA would have been difficult. And I think that's why people kind of tend to go towards consulting at that point. The second thing is about the students that come in, right? See, with consulting, there are firm cultures. I think over time we generalize them and everyone's like, oh, we're a people's firm, we do great work, we have a lot of clients. This is true for everyone. And this is true for every firm. I'm sure every firm is people-centric and every organization in the world should be people-centric, right? But there is an association. Again, it's a vibe thing, I think, where you have a group of people. You've spoken with one person who's from Bain, for example, and the way they talk about their work is really exciting and inspiring for you. And so you decide to go to Bain. And I
Hmm.
think that's the logical progression of having these classmates that are from different firms, engaging with them, really interacting and understanding what their work is like. Um, they'll tell you about a project they did in some part of the world that you've always wanted to go to. So you kind of join and you're like, okay, maybe that's where I want to go. This is a good path to follow. Um, but other than that, I think a lot of applications for consulting, they're very structured, especially at INSEAD. So the process itself is very structured. You pick the firms you want to apply to. INSEAD is lucky to have a huge alumni network. So you can reach out to alums who are working at these firms and, just ping them and be like, hey, I was thinking about applying. I know you're working there. Would you have time to maybe talk to me for 10 minutes about it? Or just like, send them a cold message saying, hey, these are my 1, 2, 3 questions. Whenever you can you get around to them? And people respond. I in my experience, they've responded more than like, going above and beyond. There are some, I don't know if this is the point for this, but there are some tips and tricks that I think one should do, whether it's reaching out to even while for those people who are doing their applications. When you're reaching out to alums, they're typically either in the middle of their MBA studies, so super busy with that, or working. And sometimes I think we get too flowery with our language when we're sending messages, where you're like, oh, hey, hope you're doing well. I have this. I am keenly excited about working with this prospect. It's so many words to just ask, hey, what's it like to work at McKinsey? And sometimes you do yourself a favor by being very direct about these are the three things I need help with. If someone arbitrarily sent me a message saying, hey, my name is Aditi, can I get on a chat with you for 10 minutes? I don't know what the chat is going to be about. I don't know what is expected of me. So the likelihood of me saying, hey, yeah, let's talk about INSEAD is going to be very vague. I'd be like, oh, INSEAD is a great school. You should definitely join. There is not much more to say other than that.
Exactly.
I think be very specific when you're doing these cold calls and messages, and don't be disheartened if people don't reply. It's not that they don't want to. I think for a lot of us, we also just kind of forget about LinkedIn once you go into your job or whatever, because initially you're
Mm.
settling in, you're working. So either
Mm.
be super direct or send as many messages as you can, and then it's a you hit one shot kind of a thing.
So, one question that I had, so one aspect of someone focusing on consulting at INSEAD could be obviously from the people that you're around. There are people from different consulting companies who are already there studying an MBA with you. Uh, does the school have some specific electives or specific focus that they have when they are looking at preparing you for a consulting career? Is there something around that?
I mean, if I'm being honest, I think a lot of the courses at INSEAD are aimed at helping you develop a toolkit. Now, I wouldn't say it's a consulting toolkit, I mean, okay, a direct answer to your question is no, there is no elective that says consulting 101.
Hmm.
But I also don't think that is something tested during the interview or application process. So it's not that if you take elective ABC and you do activities like club activities 1, 2, 3, that you'll definitely get a shortlist. Because those are just not factors or parameters. So INSEAD, for example, also has a no grade disclosure policy.
Yeah.
So they don't know what grades you've got. They don't know what courses you've taken when they're looking at your application. All
They
they
don't
see
know
is
your GMAT score also.
if you put it on your resume, they know. If you don't, then they don't.
Yeah.
Um, to be fair, some firms do ask you for your GMAT score in their application, but I don't think that's in my experience, that's not been a deciding criteria for selection. Um, I think a lot of the firms also have their own tests anyway, like they have their own logical tests when you actually do make it through the resume selection process. So I don't necessarily think the numericals of your academics are really that big a factor. Um, but the school does offer a lot of programs, that a lot of electives that help you develop this toolkit, right? For example, you could take a project finance class or you could take a sustainability reporting class. I would honestly, the only advice I can give here is that this is a 1 year/2 year period where you can genuinely learn whatever you want to learn. I think after your MBA, you're kind of restricted by the scope of work that you're doing. Even if you go into consulting, at the end of the day, there'll be 4 or 5 industries that you can really actively learn in. So I would make the most of this 1 or 2 years to learn things that you wouldn't typically do in your normal life or the job that you're picking. For me, one goal I had out of INSEAD, amongst others, was to become more comfortable with entrepreneurship. It was something that I hadn't ever engaged with in my work. It was not something I thought of as a possibility for myself when I was younger. And so I actively went out and I took like new business ventures classes or entrepreneurship through action and these kind of classes, where I actually would pick up a lot of nuances about how businesses work. And I think it's about taking what you want. So,
Mm.
second thing also is know what you want to get out of the class. I don't think saying I took Econ 101 is going to get you an application, but your learnings from that class and how you're able to really present it while you're engaging with people is the difference.
Right, right. What are the other roles that people get into post MBA at NCR? Give me like the larger chunk. What are the kind of roles people get into?
There's consulting. I know a lot of people that go into finance, so there's private equity, but venture capital, those kind of things. I will add a nuance of those kind of jobs also look for prior experience.
Mm,
Sorry, working off a cough. Um, but they also do look for prior experience. It can either be finance experiences in your history, or it could be like a consulting switch that you're doing. Other than that, there are a lot of general management positions that open up that are honestly great, that give you great quality of life, that give you like great salary, great locations. Um, lots of leadership development programs that different
understood.
firms offer. I think broadly these are the four or five. If you go deeper, then there's obviously tech and prod man and those kind of product management kind of roles. But again, it's a lot about picking what you want, right? And so that's another thing about INSEAD. I think since the people that come in are slightly older than an average B school, for example, a lot of people also have families or like, existing relationships that they want to think about as a factor in their decisions. So it's not necessarily just economically driven that, oh, which place gives me the best salary. It's also where you want to live in the longer run. And sometimes it's just dreams. Like that, I have friends who just wanted to live in Paris all their lives. And so they spent that year learning French, like building their network in France, engaging with people, and they were happy to do like any kind of role that was decent for a post MBA candidate in that space. So you have to pick about like what works for you and then go from there.
Right. Awesome. Tell me about the McKinsey hiring process. What do they do? And I've heard a lot, and I've heard a lot of podcasts, and also through our students who got into these companies before. They talk a lot about the different levels of uh, you know hurdles, I would say, that they need to go through to actually get into a company or any big firm or any consulting firm for that matter. What was the McKinsey process, and how grueling or easy was it for you?
Me was fun. I don't know. And I think that's the thing. Then when you know if you want to get somewhere, then even if it's a little bit of hard work, it seems fun. But let me tell you about the process. It's the first is obviously for every firm, and this is very industry agnostic, is a resume selection process. So you make your resume, and honestly, the amount of time I've spent on my resume is hilarious. I think until 1 hour before the submission of my application, I was still making edits on my resume. Okay. So another one of those things that'll never be perfect, but again, you do your best there. Um, you figure out what are the words or like the projects that you worked on that you think can add value to the firm, and you do that to your resume. The application's pretty straightforward. When you do get a a callback, if I may, for the process itself, the first step is a game. It's really fun actually, and it's an ecosystem game. You can find it on YouTube. It's called the McKinsey Solve. um, and it's just super fun. It's an interactive game where you have to basically build an ecosystem and you have to figure out how that's balanced. So it's a lot of logical reasoning, critical thinking, that kind of stuff. But it was just extremely fun. Followed by a small online case, which again is very interesting. And then when you go through that, then you have your interview process. At least this was the process for us at NCR. I realized that it's also different in different schools just by a little bit. But this is more or less what you can expect at a McKinsey interview. For me, my McKinsey interview was actually extremely like it was a lot of work in hindsight, but it was just super fun because I had four interviews back to back on the same day. So it started at I think 2 in the afternoon and it went on till 8:30 in the night. Um, but no, the interviews themselves were just a lot of fun. It was a lot of engagement. I think a couple of tips that I can give, right, is just practice casing. I don't think one should think that, oh, I'm really great at thinking at my feet. I can figure this out on the spot. Because there's structures that'll only help you do better. I think by the time I went for my interview, I'd already done like 30 plus cases. 30 plus good cases, not like, whatever, karnik, like, not the flippantly done type cases.
Mm.
Um, but do your cases. The McKinsey interviews are also super easy in the sense that, again, super structured. They only have 4 questions that they ask. They tell you what those 4 questions are going to be. So they give you every platform to really excel and succeed and tell your story the best way you can. The 4 things also, I think, are on their website, but it's really broad. Like it's courageous change, personal impact, entrepreneurship, and I think I'm forgetting the fourth one. But these are stories that anybody can tell, no matter what you've done. You can find a story from your life that fits. Find the best way to say it. Um, I've been telling my friends, I'm helping a couple of my friends with their interviews right now as well, right? It's not about making a it's not about portraying yourself as someone who you're not. But you can also go into an interview saying, I want everyone to remember that Aditi is funny. And so I spend a lot of time, energy, concentrating that effort into bringing out the fun side of me. And
Mm.
I think those are things that one can do to prepare. It's also true for MBA applications or anywhere else, right? Is yeah, okay, you have to be yourself, but yourself is a culmination of 27 years. So you can't really portray 27 years at once. You figure out what are the highlights that you want to really bring out and go with that.
Right, right. Perfect. So I want to now do like a myth or real kind of a question answer with you. Again, this is completely something that a lot of students have in their mind when they are looking at consulting as a career. The learning curve is too steep in consulting. Myth or real?
I don't know
I
about
know
too
you're
steep, but
still,
it's
yeah,
steep. No, it's not too steep. I think, again, it's about knowing what you want to get out of the process. If you came here to learn about different industries, then it won't seem steep because you are going in with the expectation. And this is the biggest thing with consulting, right? Is you really need to do your expectation management. You cannot say that I want to do consulting and then be okay and then cry about not having a 9 to 5 job. So there's an expectation setting that everyone's very upfront about. I don't think any firm is really selling that, oh, you can go home at 3 every day uh, kind of a vibe. Everyone's very up in front that, okay, it's a demanding job and you get compensated for that job. But it's about expectation management. So coming back to this question, I think learning curve is steep, yes, but you also then kind of pick the people who are willing to learn. So then it's easier in that sense.
right. Uh, how many years does it take for you to get to a partner role?
Honestly,
Any
not
idea?
qualified to answer this question. But at McKinsey, I remember on our first day or second day, they said we hire everybody only if we think they can, everybody that's hired, we think has the potential to be a partner. And that's the
Right.
selection criteria for people. So if we see that people can become partners, I think typically it's supposed to be 5 years or something, but I don't know how true that is. Also,
Right.
you might not want to stick around for that long, right? If you're going into consulting with the idea that you want to learn about different industries and find something you want to do in the longer run, you might want to leave after 2 or 3 years, or maybe the work is not for you. Like traveling sounds fun, but when you're doing it 4 days a week, it can get quite intense. So maybe that's not a life for you. So you might not want to
Right.
be a partner.
Right. You get exposure to multiple industries and challenges, and I want to pick this specifically because um, uh, the whole idea of being adaptive is something that is very important in consulting. And though there are boutique consulting firms, McKinsey focuses a lot on having a very adaptive skill set specifically. How to is this?
Very true. I think this is one of the most true things that I can say about consulting, right? And you can choose to get exposure. So I think the one part here that I would add is you can choose what industries you really want to work with. If you
Mm.
know you're interested in the banking sector, for example, you can actively flag that off with the team and say that, hey, I'm really interested in banking. Can I do more projects in banking? And initially, they will push you to try different things. It's almost like a requirement that, you try to expose yourself to more people, to more industries. But 2, 3 years into the firm, you can start aligning yourself with the industry that works for you. So your first
Right.
1, 2 years are like a playground where you can basically do whatever you want.
All right. You get to work with CEOs of top companies, CXOs of top companies.
Cannot comment, but from what I've heard, it's true. Uh,
That's right. So yeah, I think this is more around paths to explore. Again, Aditi is just in the beginning of the career, but like she mentioned, in terms of what other options that you can get into, or whether you want to stick around in consulting, also this is something that you can look at, right? A lot of people get into corporate strategy roles. They get into entrepreneurship. They get into managing companies at a different general management kind of a role, because consulting gives you that opportunity to get an exposure to the kind of challenges or the variety of challenges that a business faces, typically, right? Right. All right. So, with that, let me just stop my presentation right now and look at questions, because I also have, if anybody has any specific questions, and then I will tell a little bit about the whole application process for anyone who's interested. But any specific questions people have, please feel free to put it on the chat window. I hope this session was useful. My focus was to give you a glimpse of what it is at INSEAD. My focus was to give a glimpse of what it is to get into a consulting career, and also to motivate all of you who are as part of this process to start early, and also put in a lot of focus in your entire application process, because don't look at it as just writing essays. It's a lot more than that. It is your career, it is your journey, so it becomes very important for you to think through that part. So questions, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Aditi is here for some more time, so we can see if we can get some answers to that. Any
so
questions?
under the 10
If no
minutes, but
questions, okay. So if no questions, yes, questions, just type in on the chat window. Okay. I have 1 year experience. Do you think I would wait to apply to top colleges? Yes, your experience is calculated by the time you join the course, and it completely depends on what your experience is. Because it is not about the number, but it's about the quality of the experience that matters. So it's pretty much more based on that. Your thoughts? Do you have
no,
any
for
thoughts?
sure, I agree. I think schools also do have a requirement of a certain number of years. But even outside of that, I would highly recommend, like, even if you get started with the process, right, you have your essays in place and then you take the time to really learn. I think 1 year of experience, again, like ma'am rightly said, it's a lot about what you've done. But I think take the time to really understand what you want to do. Maybe an MBA is not for you. And those are things you only realize when you spend time in the real world, so to speak, right? The more you work, or maybe the work you're doing is super fun and you just want to stick around for longer. So yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Akhilesh. Okay, there's a question. With the world experiencing economic slowdown, are the opportunities currently in consulting also slowing down? Is the selection getting tougher? That's a great question.
It is a great question. And the truth is, yes, I don't want to paint like, a rosy picture when it's not, when it doesn't exist. It is slowing down. But it's almost cyclical, no? Given everything that's happening, if it's slowing down now, it will pick up in some part of the world. Just because a certain area is hiring lesser does not mean the whole world is hiring lesser. Number two is you want to be best positioned for the point in time when the cycle starts picking up again. So you really want to build a toolkit or have a good, like, a degree that adds value to your education at a time when this slowdown does start picking up. If you're looking at 2 year courses, I'm not sure which ones you're looking at, but if you're looking at 1 year, 2 year courses, that's also a long amount of time. So say you start now, you finish your applications, you get in, and you go to school, you finish school, that's already 2026. So that's a lot of time for the current scenario to change. But selection into schools, I don't think are getting tougher. And I won't say they're getting tougher at all. It's just that you also don't want to be hired and be put on the bench, right? Like you wouldn't want to chill when you're full of energy and ambition and drive. So yeah, quick answer is yes, but it'll get better.
Yeah. One interesting thing that I wanted to focus more on is the focus on Middle East because you got an opportunity to work with McKinsey in Dubai.
Yeah.
I see a lot of these schools focusing on Middle East as um, a place where they are creating a lot more. The career services team is creating a lot more connection over there. How true is it, or do you think that has that's how these schools are looking at too?
I cannot speak for the schools, but the reason this region is booming is because there are a lot of projects happening here, right? And it's a natural like flow of real life instances, so to speak. So, for example, saturated markets right now are not doing a lot of development projects. So you
Mm,
wouldn't expect your somewhere in Europe to build like a new city that needs 5,000 consultants from around the world, right? But that is the kind of stuff that's happening in Saudi or Dubai, or there's a lot of just concrete development that's happening.
mm,
And so I think that's why there's been a recent boom in the Middle East consulting like journey.
mm,
So that's why these schools are kind of focusing on those locations and areas.
mm,
But there are different practices, different places of the world that are working, right? For example, in EU, if you want to work, and I'm being very generic, but if you're passionate about sustainability or impact, then the EU market is great in that sense, right? There's a lot of work happening on small, medium-sized enterprises in that space. Different places have different practices going on, but again, I think it's highly cyclical and
oh,
ebbs and tides, right?
right, right. Any other questions? Otherwise, I will just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about how we go through the entire application process, also, especially for people who have not got onto this whole thing. So, this is how your team looks like when you get started with the application process. So, I kind of manage and orchestrate the whole thing, where I make sure that your strategy in terms of what you want to plan, what you want to say, how you want to write is something that I work with. We also have a storytelling team that focuses on how, before you submit, how your essay should look, right? Whether the stories is coming out the way it should be. We also have a team that manages the entire operations part of it because there are too many moving parts that are happening when we are looking at the application. And obviously, our most important part, the B School mentors and alums, where you can connect to. And, I also arrange those aspects where specifically are looking at specific information. How do you reach out to them? What do you talk to them? What kind of questions to ask? Like like Aditi mentioned, it's important to prep when you are even asking for help, or when you are reaching out to alums on LinkedIn also, right? So that's also something that we focus on.
I really just want
Some,
to
yeah,
jump in on that previous point. I think for me, my mentor connect was the key to unlocking any school that I have. For me, it went such a long way. The person that I was partnered with, she was just, I think everything, she really did understand like she took the time. I would not say she took the time to understand what I wanted to say and really helped me put my thoughts into the best possible phrases and words, right?
right.
Um, and I think that sort of for everyone who's going to go through this process, have a couple of things in mind, right? Number one, do an expectation setting. First things first, figure out if you're a morning person or an evening person, if they are morning people or evening people, because it's these small details that go such a long way, because if you know you're going to only submit things at 3 a.m. in the morning, which in my case was true, be sure you convey that and communicate that so that they can manage their times. Because sometimes I think there's just a huge mismatch of understanding sometimes of ways of working. So for me, I think with my mentor, she really set the ground for me to first tell my story. Then she said, okay, I think these are the cool things that we can really highlight and bring out. And then she said, okay, you did A, but we can make it capital A and say it like this, right? Um, and it was just like, for me, I think honestly, I'm so grateful for my mentor. I would also say really take the time to figure out if the person you're working with is the best person for this process, right? Because it's a long journey. So it's okay to be very critical and picky about whether they really understand or not, because
Right,
it's not a one day situation.
right.
Um, So yeah,
Right.
that's my final thing. But I really do have to drop because I am working today. I'm
Yeah,
on
yeah,
released week.
yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Aditi. I think, it was great having you here. I just want to take a minute to just talk about important things that you need to do before you get started in the whole application process. But other than that, thank you so much, Aditi, for being here. Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this webinar. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was insightful. I hope you got a very good idea on the kind of effort and the focus that you need to put in terms of your whole application process, and the seriousness that you need to put in the whole application process also. Thank you so much, Shantanu.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
Thank
much,
you for
guys.
having
Thank
me
you
in
so
the
much,
group.
Aditi. Thank you so much, Aditi. Bye bye. I'll catch up with you later. Thank you so much.
Done. See you. Best of luck, everyone.
Thank you so much. All the best, everyone. Just few things, whatever I've put on the slide, just make sure you go through it, and you understand what is really important before you get started with your whole process, right? Thank you so much, guys. Have a nice weekend. I hope you have a nice Sunday too. Bye-bye. Bye.